Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Mike Switzer, and I am one of the pastors at Royal View. I look after young adults and youth and worship and really whatever else is needed. And it's been a interesting time to say the least. I would say, definitely not ideal times that we're living in, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. But I hope that whoever's watching this, wherever you are, most likely at home, or if it's on a break at work, if you are deemed essential, that it would encourage your spirit, that it would help to get you through the weekend, and that you would pass it on to somebody if it did that as well, to encourage them. And we do this every 2 weeks. We've been doing this podcast, and we've been doing it for a few months now. We just discuss things at the end. And this week, we're going to be talking about the parable of the prodigal son, what that translates today, and how we can be really examples and, just kind of measuring that, how we're going to be able to meet people where they're at. Maybe they've grown up in the church. Maybe they have, just been in a tough spot and they were a little bit religious. There's so many different things, but the parable is found in Luke 15, 11 to 32. And Jesus is talking about this, of course. And there's a son. And before that we get into that, I'm going to introduce my guest here, Trisha Gooden. And Trisha, tell us a little bit about yourself. Thank you for joining us.
Yep, no problem. I'm happy to be here. So a little bit about me. I come from a background where my mom and my family, my grandmother, they're believers, but my mom was a single mother, and growing up, she always was working. And I was going to church growing up when I was smaller, but it was with our neighbor. So our neighbors were Christian. And actually they went to Royal View too. And that's the way I would actually go to church, because my mom was working so much that she literally didn't have time. So that was literally the only way that I was going to church. And once they moved, everything started to change. I started to stray away more because of the different crowd I was hanging around with. And I mean, I've always believed in God. I knew there was a God, but I just wasn't within the church.
Right.
And so I mean, I grew up and went to high school. Still, I wasn't really going to church. I still believed, but I wasn't really living my life, as you would if you were a believer. I was very rebellious.
Sure.
Very, very rebellious. I, wasn't what you would say, following the rules of, I would drink and, party.
Right.
I was not a kid that you would say that was living the right lifestyle. And because my mom was a single parent, I was more rebellious because I was able to do things while she was not around.
Right.
And I found myself, though, in a place where, I was always in different relationships, and they weren't the best relationships. Even with friends too, they weren't the best relationships. Some were abusive. Some were, just verbally abusive as well. And I just wasn't happy with my life. And it took me until, as I got older and I had my son, Zayden, that relationship as well wasn't the best as well. And it took me until recently where I separated from my ex-husband, and that just took a big turn for me, and I was in a very bad place in my life, and I didn't care whether I woke up. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to sleep. I could barely take care of my son. And I remember just meeting someone, and they were just like, just give it to God. Just pray about it. And this person was a believer. And, you know, it took me to really hear this person, and they just encouraged me to pray. And this is how my life changed. And this is how everything started to, you know, look better in my life. And this is how I was saved. So yeah, you know, I'm so thankful, and I'm so grateful that my life has turned around, because I don't know what I would do.
Yeah.
I don't know where I would be if I didn't have Jesus in my life today.
So it's interesting that, I mean, so I'll talk with a lot of students, either currently in our youth group or have been in the past. And just full disclosure, I think, oh my goodness, I think I started like helping out at church when I was probably 17, 18 with kids and stuff, right? And
Yeah.
you would see all these different community kids, and there would be kids that would be kind of their roadmap would look like yours, and there would be somebody who was a relative or a neighbor who would bring them to, you know, VBS, which is Vacation Bible School, or with maybe you know, a cousin for youth or something like that. And then they would get plugged in, and they would feel something that as maybe a kid they wouldn't totally know how to talk about, you know, how they felt, how they were accepted, knowing that there were some stories there that were good. And then later on, I would chat with some of these kids or students, and they're older, and they would never say anything really bad about their experience. And now I'm talking about our church right now, because that's
Right.
for the most part is all I've known too. And
Right.
they'd be talking about, oh, I loved going to youth. I was so happy there. And then later on, they would come back in life when they understood a little bit more of, you know, how to talk about, how to communicate what they were feeling. Oh, this is still a good place. This is still
Right.
a good place. And there's a greater appreciation for that. And I think that's a great part of your story, your history, you know. And for me, I came back, you know, I grew up in the church, but I don't think that, as sometimes with maturity, we understand what we totally have when it comes to maybe church, but most definitely God. You know, what he does for us. You know, he talks about that only being like children will you inherit the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that innocence, right?
Yeah.
And that's such a huge thing. And I'm thinking, oh man, I wish I could go back to some of those times of and you know, with Zayden, you know, oh, I wish I could just look at it in that simple of a way. And that's what
Yeah.
God's calling us to do. And it's interesting here, and we're gonna take a little bit of time to kind of unpack how maybe you view it and how I view it. When we look at the parable that Jesus is talking about, what hits me is a couple different things. When he's talking about the father gives him the inheritance and releases. And I think that's such a great thing that God allows us to go through and experience, however bad, you know, these
Yeah.
things may be. And it never says in the parable that the father ever goes, are you sure you want to do that? You know, it's just kind of like, okay, well, And what you often see is you often, just skip to the part where it's the acceptance, right? When he puts the ring on his finger and all that kind of stuff. But with your story, what's really cool is there's that breaking point that we all come to when we accept Jesus. And we
Yeah.
will, there's humility in it. And it's, you know what, I'll do anything to get right. I just want I just want the answer. And for me, I was kind of like, you know what? I know that even if I was the least of these, I would be treated well. That's kind of how I felt. And
Right.
the son is talking about, oh man, I have nothing left. I'm not, you were talking about, I don't want to eat. Well, the son can't eat. There's nothing to eat. And he's wanting the joy to be able to have good food. And he knows that being a servant would be better at his dad's house than actually where he is, herding these pigs and working for these other people, because he'd squandered everything out of his, brokenness and doing, whatever he wanted to do. And that's so true. And it is fun for a season. Like if we're to
Yeah.
be honest people, I
Yep.
think we would have to admit that it is fun for a season. And there are those friends that, even still, I keep in touch with people that when I was having my rebellious days. It's interesting to know that when they find out what I do now, they always were kind of like, yeah, I figured you'd do that. And, I'm just thinking about just some of those friends saying that, and just how interesting it was that it would all kind of work out so beautifully. And then that you would come back to Royal View is such a neat thing too. You would go as a kid, and then you'd end up, kind of where you started from. And I wonder if there's any even significance in your journey with that, where it's kind of like, okay, you got to start off, go back to where you were, maybe even maturity wise,
Yeah.
so that you could really move forward with what God's plan was for you. But what I really want us to talk about, as people that have been redeemed, have been set free by the power of the Holy Spirit, and it's a new day for both of us, different stories, different walks of life, although we didn't live too far apart, which is kind of interesting. I grew up in
No.
Marconi, and
Yeah.
not too far. But what's interesting to me in the whole story is the other son, where he's like, you didn't throw a party for me. What about us that now have been in it for a season or two, that it's so easy to forget that we were brought into the fold? How do you think that we can be reaching out to people? Prime example, I talked about youth for a second, and they'll always say this to me if they haven't been in youth for a long time, and they'll always say something like, oh, I've been meaning to come back. And they're like 25 years old now, and I haven't seen them in a long time. And they're like, oh, I've been meaning to come back. And I'm like, oh, you didn't have to say that. I mean, the door's always open, but there's no pressure, right? And that's kind of an interesting thing. What do you think we can do to minister to the prodigal, or those that are new, so that we can show them the kind of love that the Father showed the Son? It's a big question.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I feel like a lot of people have this way of thinking about the church, and I hear it all the time. They feel like if they go into a church, they'll feel judged.
Right.
And I feel like that's the whole thing of why people don't want to come. So just for me personally, like I was, saved by someone just encouraging me just to talk to God. It doesn't have to be in the church, just talking to someone, encouraging them, just telling them, like, have you ever prayed? Maybe try praying, see how you feel.
Mm.
You know, I mean I don't feel like you have to pressure anybody because it's their choice, but maybe just encouraging them, encourage them to read a scripture. Like for me, like my friends, they see how my life has changed and they're wondering what happened.
Mm.
And they see it in me and they see how happy I am, because before I was so miserable. So they even asked me, like, how did you get to this place? And I always go to the book of John. I say, read the book of John. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
you know and that's just giving them options. When you give people options and without forcing it on them, because people, they don't like to be pressured, they don't like to be told what to do, like we know that. So I think giving options and encouraging them is very helpful.
So I talked with our Pastor Gary, today, and he actually was pretty brave today and called into, I mean, it's AM 980, so it's not like you or I really listen to AM 980, let's be honest. But that's not to tease him, but it was great because he actually called in, and they were talking about all these different churches in Canada and Ontario that are still meeting anyway. And
Right.
wherever you land on the side of whatever side that you're on, I'm not here to get into that. But what I
Right.
am here to talk about is the fact that he called in and said most churches aren't like that. That is so minority, it's crazy. Most churches are wanting to abide by the law and standards and meet people where they're at, and be, it's funny, we call a church service a service. What is it servicing? It's supposed to service us so that we'll go out and do the work, right?
Right.
So it is an interesting thing that, uh, the social club is being challenged now for what it is
Right.
on some of those levels. And I don't think you and I were ministered to at all by a social club. I think we were ministered to by Jesus himself, and working through people. The fact that somebody would encourage you to pray is a big step, because then in order to pray, it means that we're actually going to, I think, not just figuratively get on our knees, but literally in some cases get on our knees, showing a sign of repentance and surrender, that
Right.
I'm at the end of myself and I'm ready to give it up. And when people are there, I believe that God then softens the heart. And
Right.
that's the beautiful thing. And then we can receive. And
Right.
because in the story, we don't see any change until,
Right.
right? So we don't see any change in the son until he's ready to show humility. And the
Yeah.
moment that he's ready to show humility is the moment that the father's ready to receive. And that's a huge thing. It only happened for me. It only happened for you when we were at our end and we were broken. And then somebody
Yeah.
actually had the courage to
Yeah.
say to us, okay, here's something you can do. And they
Yeah.
gave us options. I like that. What can we do to remind ourselves that, I mean, how do I approach this? When you're in the church a lot and you're serving, you serve, right? Like you serve on the First Impressions team. What's a First Impressions team? Explain this to me.
Like the greeting, like when
Yeah.
I greet people
Okay.
at the door.
Okay.
yeah, just welcoming people to the church, just letting them know like any events that are going on within the church,
Right.
seating them, because with COVID precautions, we have to make sure that people are seated within their household.
Right.
um, if they have any questions, you can answer them. um,
Right.
yeah.
All that,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're actively serving, you're involved. This is what's interesting. I'm going to, I guess, spill the tea on this. I have heard people in churches in our fellowship, meaning like affiliated, kind of not sister churches, but, we're associated with some of these different churches. They would be the same denomination as us, and there would be people on the board in some of these churches or actively involved in these churches that would say, well, why do we need to reach out to our community? Don't we have enough people in the church? And that's kind of like that whole idea of the other son saying, well, why do you need to celebrate the return of this, um, son that squandered all of his inheritance? Why would you celebrate that? And I think what's interesting is, for our church, we've seen a lot of people returning, some prodigals, literally, some have just geographically, like TG and Victor, for instance, they were in Ottawa for years and they were integral members of our church, and now they're back. And
Yep.
what a great time to have people that were strong prayer people to come back. And it's
Yep.
kind of a neat thing that it just kind of seems that God is calling people that had left
Right.
back. And what do you think would cause people to want to come back in this season?
Well, that's their home. There's no place like home, right?
Yep.
And that's to me, that's what comes out. Like, there's no place like home. That's where you're comfortable, and that's where you feel wanted and appreciated, right? It's kind of like, if you move somewhere, you miss home. People, they feel lost. Even Christians, they feel lost. And why not go back home? Why not go back home to where you're used to? People are coming back because either, like you said, God is working. God is working. We don't know we can't see, but he's working, and there's a reason why we are called back.
Yep.
So we can't really question it. We just got to be thankful and grateful. And we know that he's working, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, it is a different time for sure. I think we'll see a lot of people that will come back for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
You and I have very different stories. I mean, I don't like when people lump everybody in where it's like, okay, you guys both rebelled. Yeah, but it was different. It's different. Like, everybody's story is very different. How I emotionally felt and you emotionally felt, and it's a totally different story, and it's a beautiful story because of the end of it, which we don't know the full end of it. It's not done yet, but man, it's been a great journey. And you know what? I don't think I'd take a lot of it back, because I'm more thankful today that I don't live through my parents' experience. I have a real relationship with the Lord, that's mine, and you do as well. And I think Zayden will see that, and I know Judah will see that for sure. And I think what's frustrating for me sometimes as a parent, is that we see some of these things in our kids that are so much like us, and we're just like, we want to spare them our mistakes. And sometimes because I feel that I push him into my mistake from trying to spare him from my mistakes because of my approach.
Yeah.
And it's because it's not a loving approach, right? It's just
Right.
a straight up like, don't do that. And I'm more angry at myself that got passed on
Right.
somehow.
Right.
And that's kind of something. And I think that we can be guilty of that in the church too, and why that prodigals even leave, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right.
Like, we'll see things. I remember there'd be people growing up in the church, they would say, well, you shouldn't be into that, you shouldn't be doing that. And it wasn't even
Right.
it wasn't even a bad thing necessarily. It was just and it didn't make me not feel, it wasn't about feeling welcome. It was kind of like, that's really annoying.
Yeah.
And
Ah,
yeah, it's not that I didn't think people loved me. It was just like, that's really annoying. Like, people telling me to not wear a hat in church.
right.
And I know that's just a small thing, but now I realize that there's just certain things that I'm a hypocrite as a parent, because I'm like, I'm not really
Right.
knocking this parenting thing out of the park. But when we see, and I would probably be prone to want to reward on maybe a surface level the kid that was faithful more too. But it is an interesting story. I do love it. I think there's a lot we can learn from it, especially in this season, because I do believe that, like, we've been talking about, we're going to see more people come back than ever before. And what I want us to do now is I want us to just take a few minutes out of our time. I hope you'll be on this discussion as well for this Saturday. But I want us to take a few minutes, and I want us to talk about just some ways that we can be inviting when it comes to people that are on their journey. What are some things? I loved what you talked about, the practical things of giving people options. Like, you gave them John, like talking about prayer. Those are great options to get people soul searching. And there's going to be a lot of people asking questions, even with the new Academy Award winning movie Soul, right? That's a big.
I just watched it with Zayden on Saturday.
Isn't it a beautiful story?
Yes. Yes, I loved it.
Such a great story, talking about that your existence, it's really just for you to exist and live.
Yes.
And that's your purpose. And I love that. I think that's true in a lot of ways. But let's talk about some of those things, how we can be inviting. There's all of these spiritual things coming up now. If we look back to the Bible, we know that Jews were all about the spiritual. We know that the Gentiles were all about the mind, and it was all about just knowledge and all that kind of stuff. And we know that the cross is foolishness to those that are all about knowledge, right? But the Western world's changing, and it's becoming more spiritual than ever before, and that has its own problems. But in this time, when we can't make sense of social distancing and none of the science is making sense and all this different stuff is happening, I think we're going to see people returning. I think we're going to see people that are going to have a lot of questions. And my question now, as we break off and talk about this, in the description, you can get that Zoom link. We're going to talk about different ways that we can welcome the prodigal home, and different ways that we can welcome people into our community. So we're going to do that now. So just click in the description there and join the Zoom call. We're only going to be 20 minutes, all that kind of stuff, but we'd love to hear from you. And we look forward to doing some extra things. So just before that you go, thank you, Tricia, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And I know we've had some freeze ups here with the Zoom call, and my audio is kind of being a little bit weird. But thanks for joining us, talking about your story a little bit. And you know what? If you'd like to ask Trisha Moore in the, the Zoom call, I'm sure she
Yeah,
can handle it. I'm sure she can
yeah,
handle it. I think
bring it
that'd be
on.
I think that'd be great. One thing that we're gonna do moving forward on Monday nights, we're gonna do something, a watch along on Zoom uh, for The Chosen. And this is a new TV show. It's all biblically based. It's all talking about I think it's the first four books in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the whole process of Jesus. Such a great story, and Hollywood actors are there. But what we're gonna do is on Mondays we're gonna watch. They're only some episodes are half hour, some episodes are 40 minutes, and we're gonna start. Um, I think probably this Monday, and we'll give you all of the links on how to do that, and we'll walk you through it. But it's cross-platform, so you don't have to have a streaming service necessarily. It's totally free. It's great quality, and we're going to watch it all together, and then we're going to talk about it. And it's kind of interesting, for us, it's kind of been very emotional in the house because, oh, yeah, that's Jesus. That's like the closest thing I can think of to the person that I know that lives in me. So we're going to do this every Monday, take a half hour to 40 minutes out of our time, watch along, talk about it. Because if we're really being honest, there's not much more we can do anyway. You're probably going to watch some show that, talks about stuff that's not really edifying anyway, and we still love you through it anyway, but let's be honest. So let's watch this. It's been really encouraging, and yeah, and we'll walk you through it. We'll get you started on that, but right now we'll go to the call, and we look forward to it. Thanks again.